Glossary of Plow Stories by Clara D. Pierson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Glossary. Axle. The bar connecting the opposite wheels of a carriage, wagon, or implement. Bake kettle. A strong iron kettle, standing on short stumpy legs. It was set among hot coals, and covered by a strong metal cover on which coals were laid. Bread and other food were baked in it. Bed cord. The long rope which was laced back and forth between the head and the footboards of a bed and between the two sideboards. It held the great ticks, or bags filled with straw or feathers, on which people slept. There were no bed springs in the olden days. Birch broom. A broom such as the Indians made by whittling one end of a birch sapling into fine, flat strips and fastening them together into a rude broom. The other end of the 6-foot section of the sapling was whittled and smoothed into shape as a handle. Coulter. A cutter attached to the plow beam. To cut the turf. Coulters used to be straight, but now they are often sharp-edged small discs called rolling coulters. Coyote, a prairie wolf. Charger. A contrivance for measuring and placing in a gun a certain quantity or charge of powder or shot. Chilled plowshares. Plowshares and moldboards of iron are chilled in the casting by having a place in the mold filled with very cold water. This makes them harder and better able to stand the scratching of sandy or stony soil. It makes them wear longer, rust less, and scour better. Where the soil is not sandy, it is better to use steel plows. About half of the farmlands in the United States are sandy. Crane. A swinging iron arm with a hook at the end fastened to the side of the fireplace. A kettle could be hung on the hook. While the crane was swung out into the room, it could then be pushed back to bring the kettle over the fire. Before this was invented by a Yankee, all kettles were hung from hooks fixed in the top of the fireplace, and cooking was much more difficult. First day, the Quaker name for Sunday. Flint and steel. The materials used for over 200 years for making fire. A piece of steel was struck on a piece of flint, and when a spark flew off, it was caught on a piece of tinder. Anything which could blaze easily. Old linen was most often used for tinder, and every scrap of it was carefully saved for this purpose. The early settlers tried never to let their fires go out, because it was so hard to light them again. Gang plow. A plow which has several bottoms so arranged as to turn several furrows at once. Humus. Rotting vegetation, like grass, weeds, or grain, stubble, which makes the soil richer and is food for growing plants of all kinds. Jointer. A small metal point which is so placed as to turn a small furrow on top of the big furrow slice, so that when this slice is turned over, the sod, stubble, etc. may be turned to the bottom of the furrow. Land side. The flat side of the plow, which presses against the unplowed land. Mold board. The curving part of a plow, which is just back of the share or cutting part. It turns over the furrow slice. Pâté. The French word for pie. Pelt. The skin of a beast with the hair on. Plow beam. The horizontal part of a plow frame by which it is drawn. Plowshare. That part of a plow which cuts the ground at the bottom of the furrow and raises the slice to the mold board. Porringers. Shallow circular discs of different sizes with a single flat handle projecting from the upper edge. Powder horn. An old-fashioned contrivance for carrying gunpowder. It was usually made from the horn of an ox or cow, the larger end fitted with a metal or wooden bottom, and the small end with a movable stopper or a device for measuring out the charge of powder. Prairie chicken. A kind of grouse which lives on the prairies of the central and western states and is much hunted for food. Puncheons. Slabs split from tree trunks and with one or both sides smoothed with the axe or hatchet. They are used for flooring, where it is impossible to get sawed lumber. Puncheons are laid directly on a floor of beaten earth and rock more or less when walked upon. Scour. A plow is said to scour well when the soil does not stick to it but drops away from it, leaving it all the smoother and brighter for having been drawn through the earth. There was a time when plows were not expected to scour, and farmers carried paddles along with which to clear away the clinging earth. Settle. A bench with high back and arms, and long enough for 2 or more people. Sometimes the seat was hinged and formed the cover of a fair-sized chest. Stubble plow. Before people had their present fine implements, they had different ways of plowing stubble under. Sometimes heavy chains were dragged ahead of the plow to break it, and some stubble plows had small rollers in front of the shares to crush the stubble, so that it could be turned under more easily. Tamp. To pack by frequent gentle strokes, as when making loose damp sand into a firm hard mold. Thatch. A roof covering of straw or reeds, which is used in place of shingles. It is often held in place by long poles, which weigh it down. Thongs. Strips of leather used for fastening. Traction engine. This is the name commonly given to the large, slowly moving engines which are used to run threshing machines and other heavy farm machinery, and travel along country highways on their broad, rough-rimmed wheels, usually drawing a water tank on wheels behind them. The smaller gasoline engines, which draw implements or heavy loads behind them, are commonly spoken of as tractors. Warping. Twisting or being twisted out of shape. Withes. Slender, easily bent twigs or branches used as fastening or woven together into baskets. Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster, who was born in 1782, was such a sickly little boy that he was unable to work, and he was encouraged to play out of doors, fishing, watching the wild creatures, and riding horseback when his father plowed. When he could go to school, it was to a schoolhouse built of logs, and he had very poor teachers. Writing was very hard for him, and he used to say that he thought his fingers were meant to guide the plow instead of the pen. Still he cared so much about becoming an educated man that he would walk nearly 3 miles to school in winter whenever he was allowed to. When he grew up, he had a fine, strong body and an especially fine chest, and he lived to a good old age. As a boy, he was laughed at for being awkward and wearing poor clothes. As a man, he was one of the greatest American statesmen and a wonderful public speaker. He had a beautiful great home in Marshfield, Massachusetts, where his famous friends often came to visit him. He was a great lover of nature, and was nearly always up early enough in the morning to see the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. His farm was beside the ocean, and he worked often in the fields. He was very fond of oxen, and raised many of them, being very proud of his finely matched pairs. When he was an old man, too sick to go out into the fields, he had the oxen brought into his front yard to graze, so that he might see them from his window. It is good to remember that all his wonderful successes in Washington, where people pointed him out to strangers as one of the greatest men in America, never made him lose interest in his farm, his neighbors, or the simple little pleasures of life. Jethro Wood. Jethro Wood was born in Dartmouth, Massachusetts in 1774, but moved to Scipio, New York, when grown to manhood. When working on his wooden models, he was nicknamed the Whittling Yankee. He was not the first man to make a cast-iron plow in the United States, but he was the first to patent one and make it practical, and to get iron plows into general use. Plows had not improved in the early days of our country because England would not permit her colonies to have factories. In 1796, Charles Newbold, a farmer of Bennington, Vermont, made a cast-iron plow and used it, but he seems to have made no effort to share the results of his discovery with other people. Over in England also, men were trying to make cast iron plows. Farmers were afraid to use them at first, for they said that they would poison the soil so that good seed would not grow in it. Jethro Wood was a man who worked hard and was not afraid to be made fun of and to stand the loss of friends and money because he saw what it would mean to America to have good plows. He might have lived an easy, lazy life, for he had plenty of money. Instead of that, he worked hard, going into foundries to help cast his plows and improving his invention until he was able to patent a plow made of many different castings fastened together. That was a good thing, because when the plow broke in use, the farmer did not have to buy a whole new one, but only a part. Jethro Wood was a man honored and respected by statesmen and kings. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, was interested in plows and exchanged letters with him. But Jefferson did not see how necessary it was to have plows of different shapes for different kinds of soil, so his own experiments did not always turn out well. He helped Jethro Wood by liking him and believing in him, but he could not improve plows as Wood could. End of glossary. End of Plow Stories by Clara D. Pierson.